Hey, what's up? I'm Guy.
I'm John.
You're on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to this channel and give this video a like.
Also, check out the podcast below in the description. Subscribe to that as well.
All right, John. On Friday, Jamal Adams, who we've talked about before on this YouTube channel, said that the Jets had told him that they'd be willing to trade him if the right deal presents itself. However, the Jets have still not given his camp permission to discuss a trade. So you remember last time we talked about him, there was this list of like his favorite teams. Joe Douglas is not going to start with that list, but who knows? Maybe he'll get there one day. Jamal Adams has this year plus next year left on his contract, and says Middlecoff, it's not about an extension. It's about principle. They told him they'd do a deal, and they're not, so he wants to go somewhere else.
Well, in the NBA, when a player of Jamal Adams' caliber would just say, trade me to one of these 5 teams, those are the only teams I'm resigning with, what usually happens?
They end up on one of those 5 teams.
Yes. In the NFL, Joe Douglas doesn't give a shit about the Niners or the Jags or whoever.
Cowboys.
Right? He will trade you to the best. I'm saying, like, he doesn't want to go to the Jags, but the Jags offer him a first-round pick. He's going to the Jags. And I think the problem for Jamal Adams, I'll give him credit about this. He understands the media, and he played him like a fiddle. He used today, before the camp started, to kind of release this pretty explosive article, bashing the head coach, almost making it, here's where I will give him a little NBA style. How can the Jets allow him to show up when we know he hates the head coach?
The word is untenable. It's one of my favorite words. We hear it a lot in these situations. The situation is untenable, John.
Here is my overall pushback for the list of teams they listed, right? Cowboys, Seattle, the 49ers. Was Philadelphia one of them? He is a box safety, an excellent player, a great blitzer. He's kind of like a hybrid linebacker. I can't trade a first-round pick for a guy that I go, when we play George Kittle, when we play Travis Kelce, because ultimately when you draft Derwin James or Isaiah Simmons or those type players, you go, that is my tight end stopper. The Honey Badger, he's going to cover tight ends. That's not what this guy does. He's not a great cover guy. So if I'm the Jets and I draft this guy, remember, we said for a while the Niners should have taken him instead of Solomon Thomas. And that's true. But you can't redo stuff, right? That happened. He went to the Jets. Number 6 overall. So I drafted a guy 6 overall, and then he turned out to be a really good player, somewhat flawed, but arguably the best player on my team, him or Sam Darnold. I can't just okay, I'll just give him away for a second. That doesn't make any sense, does it, Guy?
It doesn't make any sense, John. It only makes sense if you are trapped. And as usually the case in the NFL, the organization is not the one
he's trying to do that.
He's trying to trap them, but it's hard to trap an NFL team. A lot easier to trap an NBA team or an NBA GM than it is to trap an NFL team, unless you are just willing to sit out and completely sit out. And maybe he's willing to do that. But he has this year on his contract, like I said, next year on his deal. One of the problems for him is the other thing that came out on the day that this story came out was the news that while the NFL's minimum cap is going to go up $10 million for 2021 to $175 million, that's still significantly lower than what the cap was going to be non-pandemic, where you're probably looking at a $215 million cap, right? So this is a player
like a $35 million swing.
Again, that's the minimum. So if there is less money coming in than the NFL expects, they're going to spread that cap over 4 years. So it's not an ideal day to be talking about how badly you need a contract extension and that you can't play for a particular team. In this case, it's him and the Jets. I do think if you're him, saying you don't necessarily need an extension is a smart thing to say, which is part of what he's kind of alluded to, that this is not about the extension. It's just about not being able to play for the Jets, right?
Jalen Ramsey did the same thing. I'm not going to demand, just get me out of here.
Yeah.
I need to be traded. You do not have to pay me right away.
So I think part of the question specifically for the 49ers is, at what price does this become worth it? Because I agree with you. It's not worth trading a first. And like you said, if you're the Jets, are you willing to take a second? The 49ers don't have a third. They gave that up in the Trent Williams deal. They also, at this moment, are, if the cap is, let's say, $175 million in 2021, they're $3 million under the cap right now for next year.
Well, think about this
season,
too,
I will
right?
say this real quick, though. The good news for them is they could, if Quan Alexander and Dee Ford are gone, they can clear $34 million of salary and $24 million of cap space in those two moves.
the great part about football, unlike basketball or baseball, when you do projected, like they're projected to be $30 million over the cap in 2022, we know that's irrelevant.
Right.
But where they are going to be dinged a little bit is this year, for example, they used 2 first-round players, right? Kinlaw and Ayuk. They did not have picks the next several rounds. So when you look at their roster right now, who are some of their better players? Fred Warner, 3rd-round pick. Deebo Samuel, 2nd-round pick. Like, they've littered their team. George Kittle, 5th-round pick. It helps you get through sometimes. They allow you to pay other players when you have a lot of draft picks. The 49ers don't have a lot of draft picks just this year. And those 2 guys, Kinlaw and Ayuk are on guaranteed contracts. The other great part about having a 4th rounder, if he's good, great. He's cheap. If he's bad, you can get rid of him. They're kind of in a weird spot. Dre Greenlaw is another great example. Breda for a couple years was an undrafted free agent. It's going to be fascinating how this training camp plays out. They're probably going to lean on a lot of veterans. To me, I don't know if they're in the business for these high-priced players. I don't know if you if we've all forgotten, because I sometimes maybe they should get Jamal Adams. They got this guy named George Kittle, who's the best player on their fucking team. He needs to get paid, guy. He needs to get paid. And we've seen a bunch of rumors out there. Here's what I know. I will take George Kittle on my football team and quote-unquote overpay him or make him the highest paid tight end in the history of the league without hesitation over doing something crazy for Jamal Adams, right?
Keep in mind, I think it's implied and everyone watching this video knows this, but you say George Kittle's the
Solomon
best.
Thomas be off the books as well after this year because it's his 4th year, no 5th-year option. That's, he makes decent coin.
It's one thing to have George Kittle be the best player. It's another thing for him to also be the face of your franchise team leader. That adds another layer to who else you pay and how you pay them, right? It's one thing to pay Eric Armstead. Well, he's been in your organization. If you were to bring Jamal Adams in and extend him, you're not just extending him before you extend your best player. You're extending him before you extend the leader of your franchise, we would say right now, right? Safe to say that that's who George Kittle is. So that's my point, just being that's a double whammy. Now, the counter...
The Jets in a weird spot, It makes no sense to give him away.
What do you do if you're Joe Douglas? Do you trade him? Do you trade him for a player? Like the other crazy NFL pick we saw, trade we saw was the Odell Beckham trade, right? Which was a player and a pick.
Yeah, but they got Jabril Peppers, a 3rd and a 1st. So yeah,
right. Would you trade him for a 3rd and a player? I guess would be my question. If you're a starting player and a 3rd-round pick, yeah. No. Somebody else's 1st and a 3rd, because otherwise you're not getting a 1st. If you're not getting a 1st, do you have any intention of extending him?
Well, then to me, it's like a 2, a 3, and a player.
Okay, I'm just saying, if you have no intention of extending him at this point, you've got this year, whatever happens this year, and then next year, and then what are you going to do?
Franchise him,
Yeah, but I'm just saying, this is assuming you want him around. Do you want to be in a situation where this guy? Do you think this situation is fixable?
I think a fair deal probably would be like a 2nd, a 3rd, and a player, something like that. If you were just willing to kind of move on, and maybe you could argue we got his best 3 years, cheapest 3 years, and we still didn't win. If I was, what if I'm not sold on Adam Gase? What if if I'm Joe Douglas, Adam Gase probably going to be gone after this year?
Well, if I'm Joe Douglas, then part of this is let's do some damage control here. And I guess this is what you get paid for. We did a video that's not out yet about whether or not John Lynch is a top 10 GM. Part of the job is not just find trade partners and draft players, but figure out situations like this. Now, I don't know how you figure out a situation when the player says, I'm not playing for a coach, other than to, meet at high noon and have a stare down and see who shows up and who doesn't.
Joe Douglas in somewhat of a tough spot, right? Didn't draft this guy, didn't hire the head coach, kind of just gets hired out of nowhere last year before training camp. And this is like what you said. This is part of being a general manager. You deal with these. But he just inherited these 2 problems, given his head coach and his star player that, in fairness, Jamal Adams is a big talker guy. He's jumped the shark to me on just making all these demands for a guy that hasn't accomplished that much.
But like you said at the beginning of the video, all that matters is, can you make the Jets feel like there was no way to bring you back? And then you get what you want. But you have to be. But this is and we've talked, it's the same deal in contract negotiations. How far are you willing to go? Are you willing to hold out for 6 weeks, or are you just willing to hold out for a couple weeks and then show up?
Yeah, to me, to me, the move, if you want to go full, all your chips in the middle of the table, you do not show up under any circumstances, right? To me, if he shows up, he loses a lot of leverage right away.
Yeah.
He cannot show up to training camp. But even by not showing up to training camp, I think that tells other teams you don't have to pay quite as much to get. Like, I think these teams are looking at him like, I can get him for cheap. Can I get this? Can I just give you my second round pick? Can I get Jamal Adams? Like, I don't see a team going like, you want a 1, a 2, and a player? That ship sailed. Because you do that for a guy who's either going to sign an extension right away, which is tough during the corona because the salary cap's going under, or 2 is just Jamal. Like, for example, Jalen Ramsey, when they overpaid a little bit. Same with Laramie Tunsil. One guy plays left tackle, the other guy plays shut down corner. This guy goes, yeah, he's good blitzer, good in the box against the run, and really fiery. It's like, I like watching him, but is he locking down George Kittle? Well, he's not great man-to-man cover.
You could argue then by what you're saying.
I would not, if I was a good team, I would not trade. I would take him if I can get him for really, 50 cents on the dollar. I am not playing, 120 cents on the dollar for Jamal Adams.
So while we're talking about should the Niners trade for him, or at least while that's one of the topics of discussion, in an alternate universe, there's a topic of discussion where they drafted him, and we're talking about should they extend him? Is it worth, when you've got all these other guys to pay, is it worth extending this guy, right?
To me, it would be how does he look in Robert Saleh's defense, and I would imagine he looked really good. And to me, it'd be a lot different because I don't think he'd be acting like this. This is what.
Well, of course.
Don't you think this happens a lot in the NBA and on bad NFL teams? It happened with Jalen Ramsey on a bad NFL team. Losing sucks. This guy came from LSU where he's used to winning.
If you wanted to make a case for the 49ers, if your part of your concern was just how he's acting, you'd say the 49ers have done a pretty good job in 3 years now of running a pretty tight ship, right?
I would give my second-round pick for him if I was with the Niners. That would be as high as I would go. I'd give my second-round pick as long as I didn't have to extend him and I could play out these next 2 years because I'd be planning on that second-round pick guy.
Which to me,
being in the 60s.
If you trade him for a second-round pick, what you're hoping is that you get him for this year and then you go, you know what? Cool, we're in, and then you find an extension that makes sense for you.
And even if it doesn't, that fifth-year option, he still gets paid.
It's almost $10 million.
Jalen Ramsey's playing this year on the fifth-year option, so I'd say, well, Jamal, he did. You have to.
All right, let us know what you think about this down in the comments below.